How's it going, everybody? It's Lieutenant Atterbury with the Lobos Pack Podcast. Today, we have a very special guest from ADA, currently stationed in Germany, Captain Blumeyer. Sir, it's an honor to have you on the podcast to talk about ADA and to see, what opportunities our cadets have and then what officers have in general. But starting it off, can you tell us a little bit about your origin story? Where did you start off at?
Yeah, absolutely. And happy to be here. And thank you guys for having me on. So I grew up just outside Chicago in the suburbs, north suburbs, so kind of like Waukegan area, if anybody's from there, and spent, my entire childhood in that area, and then ended up going down to university in South Carolina at USC because I had family down there and I was going to get in state anyway. So that was a no-brainer for me. And that is where I fell into the ROTC program for the Army, actually, after starting out with the Naval program and just kind of finding my way and contract availability. The Army was, I think, the better choice for me at the time. And that's kind of how I got into this. And, here we are today, about 10 years later. So that's kind of the background.
Can you talk a little bit about, first of all, I'm being from Illinois too, from Rockford area. It's always something, looking at your options. But as far as from what you remember, do you remember a lot of students, trying to get out of Illinois, going to other schools, at least from your experience? Because that's something we try to do too, is recruit from Illinois. We talk to a lot of different students there because the biggest motivator is the weather and then adventure. Because if you can get college paid for more cheaply and somewhere that's nicer, why wouldn't you?
Yeah, so I noticed that for sure, and I think for a few different reasons and factors. I would say in a lot of the suburbs of Chicago, especially up north, you tend to have some much more affluent areas that have the access or the ability to have other options for college, not just, local in-state. And I was very lucky in that regard that I kind of fell into that, group as well. But the bonus of getting the in-state down south for me was the only reason I was able to do it. That was really great. So yeah, I'd say a lot of the peers I grew up with did get to go to other, more attractive places than Northern Illinois in the winter, purely from a monetary position standpoint. But for a lot of others too, that was a huge factor. And that, I think, in that region also drives a lot of enlistments in the military out of college, out of high school as well. You got Great Lakes Naval Station there. So like everybody goes to basic at the same place, for Navy, and tons of people out of high school were jumping on that ship, no pun intended. But yeah, it wasn't any, lack of desire for Navy or, dislike with the program that they were running there. It was a great program. And I still have many friends from that side of the house too, that I met there. The biggest factor was contract availability. They were growing the Army program at a time where they were severely shrinking naval contract availability. And, even as the group of us were, performing highly, getting good scores, having good PT test scores, GPAs, and all that stuff, it was like, hey, we're going to have maybe one this year for 20 of you. You guys do get out. And then the Army recruiter comes over and says, hey, I can get, 10 of you guys in right now, track to you. I can't get you a scholarship at the moment, but you can fight for that too. And that was a big driving factor too. And no regrets. I'm glad I did it. And the Army's been really good to me so far.
That's awesome. So talk about your experience a little bit. So
I had a mentor there, Major Ron Gooding. He's since retired from the Army. He was a Mustang. So he was, I think, already at 20 when he was our APMS there and just kind of doing it as a end of career thing. He was an air defense officer and he would kind of hype up a lot of things that I was excited already about for ADA, specifically the access to the technology and the really advanced weapon systems that we get to work with. That was a huge pull for me. And that has absolutely come true during my career, and the stuff I've gotten to work with and projects that I've been on. Obviously on this medium, I can't go in a ton of detail on some of those, but that was huge for me and has, played out in that way. And then additionally, the opportunity for travel and overseas assignment. The Air Defense Branch over the past 20 to 25 years, really since the end of Desert Storm, has been the most deployed branch in the Army outside of Special Forces from a deployment to dwell ratio standpoint. So it was the big recruiting pull when I was in ROTC, and we're still using that today. If you want to travel, if you want adventure, you want to see the world, the Army in general is great for that, but air defense is in a league of its own from that standpoint.
When you were first coming into, or as a cadet, but what highlighted that sort of branch? You graduated in 2017. What was the state of, ADA? Was it something that the Army was trying to grow because they're like, we lost this, or we had this capability, but it's sort of, we haven't been focusing on it too much?
Yeah. So at the time, it was actually one of the few branches that was growing rapidly. And, you take a step back, and I looked at it from modern battlefield standpoint, looking at near peer adversaries and peer adversaries and what kind of capabilities they can bring to the table. A huge amount of them are countered by U.S. Army air defenders. So as far as like a job security standpoint, they're going to keep needing us and more of us. And that was also, a poll back in 2016, 2017, when I was putting in my sessions packet, my top 10 list. At the time, it was interesting because it was a very small branch that was trying to grow rapidly to meet these emerging threats. The adage or the joke at the time was, if you have ADA anywhere in your top 5, you're going to get it. So if you don't want ADA, keep it out of like your top 10. And that was like the legitimate advice they were giving to us. I had it number 1. So I knew the second I put my packet in, I'm probably going ADA, and that's what happened. And that did play true for a lot of, peer cadets in my year group. Like if they had it 3 or 4, they all went ADA, and we're seeing less of that now. I think we've inflated the growth numbers. The amount of lieutenants we have walking around here is wild in just our battalion, but it's going to keep growing. The opportunities are going to be there. And we gotten to see over the past few years, conflict in Ukraine, and that has only spurred the desire and need for more air missile defense capabilities, stateside and abroad.
Where was Bullock at, and what was your experience at your basic officer leader course?
Yep. So Bullock is at the Fire Center of Excellence at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. So you'll have your air defense guys there, and you'll be with the field artillery classes as well. When I went, I don't know if they do it the same way still. It was a weird like pseudo TDY. Now that I understand TDYs and stuff, looking back at it, I think they kind of screwed us, but they had us all just at the on-post hotel for the 6 or 8 months or whatever it was. And that was just kind of your residence. And then you just commute to class every day. Everyone was allowed to bring their cars and stuff, obviously. And the only ones that like got housing or off-post dwelling were the ones that were for sure staying at Fort Sill for their follow-on unit. So that was only a few people in that class. Yeah, so you get to intermingle a lot with the FA guys that are there too, because you're all, at the end of the day, you're all fires, and learn a lot from them, and they learned a lot from us too. So that was interesting.
So then you can go to your unit. Is it just the Patriot missile system? Are there other systems that the Army has?
It's interesting. So for the first, I'd say third of it, you're all together the entire time, and that's like the Common Core. And that's a lot of the basic officership stuff that would be branch immaterial, right? And then you, as a group, I would say cover pretty much just wave tops on the different U.S. Army air defense systems. So not just Patriot, but you get a very 101 level on all of our different systems. At that point, after that is complete, they'll split the class based on where your follow-on orders are. Because at that point, everybody has orders to their first duty station. If you are going to a Patriot or THAAD unit, you go to the high med track. And this is, at this point, the class splits for pretty much the rest of the course. And you do a little more in depth on Patriot, THAAD, and the high med systems. And this is what I did, because my follow-on was to a Patriot unit. And then the SHORAD track breaks off. Based again on their unit, they'll start learning LPWS, or more commonly known as the CRAM, and then Avenger Weapon Systems, Stinger, MANPADS, things like that. That is how it was set up in the 2017, 2018 timeframe. And based on the lieutenants I'm talking to now, it's still pretty similar. So you get a pretty good overview of all of them.
Okay, and then what determines whether you go SHORAD or HIMAD? Is it a choice that you get to just decide, or is there an OML based on how well you're doing in the class?
So I think the only difference would be, and if I'm wrong, and there's a West Pointer that's listening, and you just tell me I'm wrong, obviously, but I think West Point gets a little more pull in selecting their first duty location. And I want to say that's OML based. Again, not for sure. I know in ROTC, we got a wish list, and almost none of our wish lists were granted. They are going to assign you to a unit that has a specific weapon system based on needs of the branch. You go ADA, you need to go in with the mindset that I might go to a Patriot unit, I might go to a THAAD unit and be doing space stuff, or I might be at Avengers and I'm rolling out with the maneuver guys in the field a lot. I say that, I think, because that was probably the best lesson I've gotten out of all of this so far in terms of officership and your career as an Army officer, is trusting the process a little bit. There's something to be said about taking control of your own career and managing it how you see fit and, putting your preferences in. But your first assignment may not be the dream of where you want it to go, or the weapon system specifically that you joined the branch to work on. But I can look back now saying, like, man, I'm glad I just stuck with what they gave me, because I've had some amazing experiences. I did not initially want to go to Fort Bliss, Texas, and I got a lot out of my 4 years there, to include a combat deployment and the experience that I never would have had I just immediately gone to an overseas assignment or done SHORAD. Like, that might have been a little more attractive at the time, but trusting the process is huge, especially in a turbulent branch like air defense.
So just for our listeners, what's the difference between HIMAD and SHORAD?
Yeah, so HIMAD is your high and medium altitude air defense. So in the Army, that's going to be basically your Patriot and above. For our purposes in U.S. Army, that's really just Patriot and THAAD. You start to look into the National Guard for like Homeland Defense. Then you have like ground-based mid-course defense. That's our Homeland Defense against ICBMs and things like that. The standard active duty air defense officer is not going to really get their hands or feet into that unless they make a mid-career switch to the Guard. So for active duty, HIMAD is Patriot and THAAD. THAAD being the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System, THAAD. And then SHORAD, Short Range Air Defense, as it stands right now, is everything lower altitude than that Patriot. The Avenger is the kind of oldest and most tested one. That's the battery I just commanded here in Germany. And then you have the LPWS, or the CRAM, Counter Rocket Artillery and Mortar. And now our newest, latest, and greatest that they have here at in Germany as well with 5-4 Battalion is the Maneuver SHORAD, which is now I think it's called the Sergeant Stout weapon system. And that's the Striker with the Stingers and directed energy weapons mounted on it. So yeah, a lot of cool different systems that we got going right now.
Is the Sergeant Stout, did you get hands-on with it as a SHORAD, weapon system, or have you seen it, or is it something that they just came out with and they're sort of testing in an actual unit right now?
Yeah, so it was in testing or initial fielding, I guess, for probably, say, the past like 2 or 3 years, maybe. And 5-4, that's our sister battalion here in Ansbach, Germany. So you got 157, which was the one I was commanding in, and then 5-4 is right across town. They are currently, I think, the only ones that are like actively using the Stout in training. Like, it is fielded. They have crews and everything. I've got to see them operate on the range, and with some of these joint exercises we've been doing, it is a really BA piece of equipment. I think some of the nuances to it, specifically like the directed energy, is still a few years away from like full operational capability. But as far as its 30 Mike gun and the Stinger capability to shoot from that has been tested and shown in live fire exercises, things like that.
Okay, that's super interesting. Just because, so when you say directed energy, is it like the weapons, like the weapon system is to shoot at drones to disable drones, or is it to shoot at aircraft to disable them with like an electronic sort of pulse? Or do you know anything about that?
So yeah, directed energy is the fancy Army term for lasers. So a laser gun, and there's air defense mentors of mine that would kill me for saying lasers, but it's concentrated radiation and light energy specifically to damage or neutralize smaller drones, either going for like an engine kill or a C2 defeat or a command and control defeat, which would be blocking a transceiver. So think less, the electronic warfare and jamming. This is energy concentrated to the point where it is meant to damage material, if that makes sense.
That's super interesting. I will definitely have to try to find somebody else who's like has had hands-on or whatever, but it's super cool that the Army has these capabilities that they keep coming out with in order to stay above, our enemies and to be ready for anything. Going further with that, you talked about HIMAD and SHORAD, but what was it like? You had gone through Bullock, you're now a HIMAD officer. What was your first unit like?
Yep. So immediately after on graduation day from Fort Sill, I hopped in the car and drove about 10 hours down to El Paso, Texas, to Fort Bliss. So that was for 243 ADA under the 11th ADA Brigade. Fort Bliss is the biggest concentration of air defenders stateside. That's like the big base for it. The 11th Brigade has 4 different battalions. And then the divisional element, 32nd Army Air and Missile Defense Command, is also headquartered there. And they run all of the stateside FORSCOM ADA. So all that to say is that is a wild place to go as a first unit as far as exposure and networking amongst air defenders. It's a great place to go get your name out there in the branch. And it is still a very small branch, and you will see that effect throughout your career in it. You could name a base that has air defenders. I probably know somebody there because there just aren't that many. 243 at Fort Bliss. That was an intense experience as a first unit, right? Or first duty station. As an air defender, especially in the HIMAD realm, you're going to very quickly take a platoon leader position because the officers cycle quickly. And I think the reasoning behind that is how the HIMAD, specifically Patriot weapon systems, fight. It is very officer heavy from a tactics standpoint. You're on a crew as an officer, and that's in conjunction with your platoon leader duties as well. So you're wearing one hat as a tactician, mastering the weapon system, sitting behind the radar scope, and doing the air defense thing while also leading a platoon of soldiers. So that's you get very immersed into that world quickly, and it is quite busy. So first position was launcher platoon leader. You'll have 3 different platoons in a Patriot battery: a launcher platoon, fire control platoon, and then the headquarters platoon. So launchers are usually a good first starting point for a brand new second lieutenant. And you're running all of what we call the downrange equipment. So that is all of your launchers for that Patriot battery. You are responsible, for the maintenance, the upkeep of them, their readiness, and then the launcher crew's ability to do their job. While also, as mentioned, dual hatting as a tactician in that unit. So that was the first one.
When you say tactician, can you elaborate a little more doing?
Yeah, so without being able to draw or show you a diagram of a Patriot site, I'll try to brief it in words, I guess. So the Patriot site is set up where it's a fixed position weapon system, right? Once we've in place, it is maneuverable. You can jump sites, and we train to do that too. That takes an hour or two, for a very fast unit to do it. So all that to say, once you're in place, that is kind of your fixed position. The uprange equipment, or the fire control, command and control equipment, is all centralized on this little C2 shelter called the ECS, the Engagement Control Station. In that, you have, and I mean, if you're picturing from a movie or anything, like a missile defense scene where they're sitting in front of this radar screen and blips are going and flying around and stuff, that's probably pretty close to what it actually is. And you can Google inside of an ECS, and inside pictures are not classified, but so you'll be on a crew running that system completely divorced from your platoon leader duties. And that's kind of the tactician side. So understanding the ins and outs of how the system operates, how to prosecute engagements on air targets, either incoming missiles from a ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, advanced aircraft, learning how to communicate with other elements that we have out in the field that are giving you your radar feed and things like that. That's the tactician side. Knowing basically, if you could put it into one sentence, how to maximize the efficiency of your weapon system and defend your asset that you've been assigned. And then the other side of it is that the platoon leader duties of, training a group of 30 to 40 soldiers to do their specific job on the Patriot site. And in launcher platoon, that is running the launchers. In fire control platoon, it's running all of the uprange equipment that I described. So the ECS, the generators that power it, the radar itself. I hope that makes sense.
Yes, no, I really appreciate it. It's huge. Yeah, I just don't know anything about it. Who are interested, just so they understand more about. Yeah, it is more hands-on. You're as a platoon leader, your job is to manage your platoon, but at the same time, it's to like you said, do that tactical understanding of that weapon system. So, talking a little bit more about the weapon system for HIMAD, are you just engaging planes, or are there other things you're looking for to engage with a HIMAD system?
Yeah, so for Patriot specifically, I can't go into specific altitudes, but think of the different tiers of weapon systems as altitude based. At a certain cutoff, we then transition kind of into THAAD, right? So with Patriot, your primary, I would say kind of the wheelhouse for Patriot is up to medium range ballistic missiles. Um, so ballistic missiles being, either dumb bombs or like some of these more modern smart ones that can do maneuvering, just anything flying that ballistic parabolic trajectory, and we saw that in action 3 days ago in Qatar, and in Iraq as well, with Patriot systems engaging TBMs. Patriot is also rated for cruise missile defense, and a lot of these different threats will kind of mesh and meld into different weapon systems that can engage them. So there are SHORAD ones that do have capability against cruise missiles as well, but that kind of bleeds into Patriot as well. At that point, it's whoever in your defense design or however the systems are set up who has the best shot at it. So cruise missiles would absolutely fall into Patriots as well, and then advanced aircraft. So it can IFF, identify friend foe, and discriminate and prosecute engagements against advanced, fifth generation fighter aircraft, bombers, things like that too. And then, moving up to THAAD, that's your higher level and faster moving ballistic missiles. THAAD will only ever engage the ballistic missiles. You're not going to use a THAAD interceptor on a lower speed, lower range manned aircraft, because Patriot or SHORAD can take care of that, if that makes sense.
Yes, that totally makes sense. Yeah, we covered a ton. As a battery commander, what specifically do you have? Only the HIMAD weapon systems with you? Like, basically, how many like Avengers are in your battery, or how does that work, sir? And then are you also split up between battalions? Like, the brigade commander tells you, hey, you guys are going to go here and nest with different units. How does that work?
Yeah, so I'd say the answer to that is also very weapon system dependent. So I did all of my lieutenant time in the beginning of my captain time in the HIMAD realm, specifically on Patriot. A Patriot battery commander will command one Patriot system with anywhere from 70 to 100 soldiers. Usually, if they're really plussed up for deployment, you might go a little over 100, but I would say that's probably pretty rare. So the Patriot system would be that battery's only primary crew weapon system, and that's typically the uprange equipment and 6 Patriot launchers, and then the as far as a HIMAD battery, that's kind of their mission, right? In SHORAD, it's a little different. So, and that's, where I kind of made the jump over for command. I just relinquished a couple weeks ago command of my Avenger battery. And on the SHORAD side, at least how our battalion's constituted, that was 12 Avengers, each manned by a crew of 2. And then 2 Sentinel radars. And those are the radars that specifically mesh better with the SHORAD systems. As far as how we get divvied out and used on the battlefield, as you and your listeners probably know, at the brigade level, that brigade commander fights companies, right? Or batteries. So he or she is the main decision maker on how SHORAD batteries get task forward across the battlefield. It could really quickly turn into, half of one of your platoons is going to support this BCT, and then the other 3/4 of your unit is going to go out and do a static based defense at this asset here. I would say SHORAD units get kind of divvied out a lot more because they're like little individual weapon systems that can go fight on their own, if that makes sense. Patriot is that Patriot battery, that single weapon system is the lowest denominator. You can't really divide it up amongst different units on the battlefield. It has to fight as a single entity.
Let's backtrack a little bit back to you getting to Fort Bliss. And then when you got to Fort Bliss, were they in a training cycle or were they gearing up for deployment? And then what was your career like from there, sir?
Yeah, so I got there all excited and ready for adventure and deployments and travel and stuff. And I got there and was met by the rear D. They were coming back from deployment in 2 weeks when I got there. So I was pretty bummed out when I first got there and realized that, because, I wanted to go get out there and go do, the thing, right? That said, because it's Patriot, because it's air defense, that reset cycle is real quick. So even, for some of your new guys, if they're joining air defense and, are disappointed that the first place they're going is a unit that just came off mission, they will be back on one very soon. I can promise you that. So the same thing happened for me. We, hopped immediately back into reset, equipment recap, and upgrading, which happens pretty typically after any deployment, and then started training cycle again within that first 6 months to a year. As the lieutenant in the ECS, or the van we call it, you certify on a crew. So like you have evaluators from battalion and brigade that, evaluate your ability to do your job as that tactician role. And I was already hopping in and doing that within 3 to 4 months of being there. So it happened pretty quickly. And then over the, following year after that, we were already packing up, getting ready to go again for my first deployment. So a lot of these guys, especially ones that have been doing air defense for a minute, you might get to a deployment to dwell ratio of year on, year off, or year on 1.5 off, which in a lot of places in the Army, that would be considered crazy. But yeah, these guys got back, reset. We were already out in the field training, setting up the weapon system, doing different stuff with it, and getting ready to go again. So
The question I had is, on top of that, so you said setting up the weapon system. What does it look like for you guys to train? Is there a do you work with other units so that other units fly over or something, or is it all like setting up your weapon systems and then running a simulation?
yeah, so the primary driver for the training, at least in the high MAD side, and it translates to SHORAD too, but at that Patriot unit and at most, it's run by a gunnery cycle, like you would see in any field artillery unit, any armored unit, and really any maneuver unit, going through the basics of gunnery tables, and that's outlined in a training circular for your specific weapon system. Patriot has one as well. And that's the basics of table 1, like learning the ins and outs and how to PMCS the equipment, all the way to table 8, table 10, table 12, getting out there, establishing a site, having a defended asset, running simulations, as you said, and you can do that from inside the ECS. So, I can't get a real TBM to come fly at Fort Bliss, Texas. I wouldn't want to do that. But I can set up the system where it thinks there's 100 of them coming in and start doing engagements and what that would look like if we were in real life combat scenario. And that's the primary means for training those crews, running simulations on it. And then also, being able to pick up the battery and the weapon system and move it 10 miles down the road, establish a new site, and be ready to fight again within a few hours. So that's a huge part of it. And all of those are outlined in we'll call the gunnery tables, how to get a unit from, just resetting to certified to deploy again.
When you are, so we talked a little bit about gunnery. What was it like getting to your platoons, getting to the battalion? Were you immediately then sent down, hey, you're a platoon leader now, like I need you to go? And then what was it like interacting with your platoon sergeant in that?
Yeah. So as I said, they were just coming back. So it was a really interesting situation in that regard. So those first couple of weeks, I kind of just helped out the rear D commander with stuff that he needed, just, getting my feet wet in the AO, which was nice. So by the time everybody was coming back, I kind of at least had an idea where everything was. That was a good start. But yeah, that, the second or third day after they got back, they sent me from, the battalion rear D element. They dissolved that, and then they sent me down to Charlie Battery, into the commander's office, and said, "Hey, here's your new platoon leader." And that was me. And he was like, "Cool, yeah, I'm just." The other guy was just coming out of the seat. He was about to go do a battalion staff job or something, and I immediately went in and took launcher platoon. So that was a pretty quick flash to bang when they got back. Had development from day one from my first platoon sergeant, Sergeant First Class Scott Vonda. He's like a brother to me now. We still communicate all the time. And he really showed me the ropes in that first year of like getting everybody back and training them up again for potential deployment. And he was huge in my development. That was, if I hadn't had someone as good as him, I don't know if I'd be where I am today, for sure.
Okay, and then talking more about being a platoon leader now, what's it like interacting with your soldiers in order to like get them to their highest proficiency? Because um, yeah, as far as the training cycle for them, are they like you had talked about getting them like yeah, exactly. Like what specifically are they doing, I guess? And then how does the whole team and squad dynamic work in order to make everything roll what do you call it? Roll smoothly.
Yeah, so it was I'd say a really interesting, first couple weeks because I think I had working against me already the fact they had just been downrange together for 9 months, and you get extremely close with your people on deployment. And they get back in day one, a new butter bar walks in like, "Hey, I'm your leader now," and that's a very odd position to find yourself in, and they look at you in a kind of odd way, like, really, man, like we've just been doing our job downrange on deployment for the past 9 months. Like, who are you, man? So it's really key, I would say, to immediately establish the culture of, I guess how I put it, putting that authority where the knowledge is, right? Coming in from day one, listening a lot more than you're talking, right? And learning or understanding that, hey, I'm here to learn this weapon system so I can effectively lead you guys and learn how to lead soldiers. Y'all show me what you need and what you do, and I'll keep up. All right. And that with help from my platoon sergeant, I think that worked really well, that approach, because we, over the course of that next year, got very close as a platoon. And I still talk to a lot of those guys as well that were in my platoon. The training cycle and how that looks for them in Patriot specifically. So we kind of go half and half, as I mentioned, on the officer side. So while I'm day to day planning training events for them, the soldiers and the squads, the teams, to like go do their gunnery drills, because they have to go through, a train up period as well, how to in place the launcher rapidly, how to move it, how to operate it, do maintenance on it and stuff. So we're creating training plans for that while I am concurrently doing my studying on the side to be an effective tactician. So there was a lot of time management in it. There's a ton of studying you're doing off the clock as well. So, I would get home and find myself reading technical manuals for the Patriot system and learning about different threats and what we can do to counter them and things like that. So, as far as the platoon leader position goes, and I would imagine this translates to really being a PL in any branch, it's effective time management or unit training management, and ensuring you're keeping your commander in the loop on what you are doing with your platoon, and make sure you are reaching an end state that your commander owes you from day one. You get an end state in the left and right limit from them, and you create that plan over the 6-8 month period to meet that. Really, that's the biggest thing.
What was it like getting alerted for your first or where were you going to go for your first deployment, and were you on a rotation basis for other units in an area?
Yeah, so it was about, I'd say, a year and a half after I'd been there. This was a rotational one based on the patch chart being the SecDef orders book. Um, for anyone that hasn't seen one of those, that had us going on a rotational to Kuwait and Bahrain, which were at the time pretty typical, or I guess what you would call a typical Patriot deployment, doing a static defense of a base or an asset over in theater. 9 times out of 10, it's an air base. You'll see Patriot a lot defending those. So in Bahrain, it was defending, I think the Naval Fifth Fleet headquarters was part of it. And then in Kuwait, it was defending Camp Arif Jan, which is kind of the main hub in Kuwait. We got there and started to establish after getting everything out the door and shipped over there. I went ahead on Advon. And I kind of, expected it was going to be a 9-monther. Probably that was the typical rotational deployment. And we were going to sit there and hope nothing comes in. And if it does, we were going to shoot it down. That's, for the longest time, I'd say 15 to 20 years, that's been the Patriot deployment experience. If the air missile defense guys are bored, that's a good thing, right? All of that changed in, when we got there January 2020. It was President Trump at the time, did the offensive action against General Soleimani, if you remember that. and took him out. And Iran responded by hitting two of our bases in Iraq, which was Erbil and Al Assad Air Base. The call went out basically like, hey, they just hit those with TBMs and we had nothing there to defend it. Our only, defense was everybody go get to a bunker. What are we doing about that? And, it was seen that there's a Patriot unit that just got to Kuwait and is establishing itself. We can redirect them. And, I went from expecting it to be a pretty, not laid back, but typical deployment in Kuwait, Bahrain, probably spending some time on the beach, hanging out, and to being on a blacked out C-130. And I was like, wow, this is escalated quickly, right? And that ended up being about 13 months. That was a very long year. And obviously 2020, as you are probably very aware, that, the world changed while we were going to. So we're wearing masks on deployment and stuff. And it was a wild year for sure.
Yeah, what was your experience like before getting the action with General Soleimani being destroyed? What was the deployment like before that all happened? You had mentioned it a little bit, like being on the beach. Like, sort of, what opportunities are there when nothing is sort of going on and you're just there defending? And yeah, what does that look?
Yeah, so you're gonna, on any of these rotational ones, we were only there about a month before this all happened. So this was a very small portion of the deployment. It was, we had our defended assets. That's what is assigned to you by higher command of like, this is what your system is here to defend. For ours, it was in Kuwait, it was Camp Arifjan. In Bahrain, I think it was going to be the headquarters, right? And it's establishing the weapon system there based off what the previous unit was doing, or you make some tweaks to it. And then you go through an entire new cycle of certifications there on ground, like going through that gunnery program again, running simulations specific to the location that you are at, based on the threats that are real in that area, and just absolutely, getting grilled on certifications for the first like 3 weeks that you're there to ensure that you are ready to take over the defense of that base from the unit that's giving it to you. And that was really my entire time in Kuwait. The short time I was there, that it was just, in the ECS running simulations and training. So it is by no means, laid back, chill, even on those rotational ones. You're training the entire 9 months you're there, just trying to get better and more efficient at it. Random 2 a.m. drills with the guys on shift because you're running a 24-hour shift, see if you catch anybody sleeping, right? And things like that. That said, though, I mean, there was very likely going to be opportunities to, go do a little bit of traveling if you get some time off or mid-tour leave or something like that in Bahrain or Kuwait or, any part of that region. They usually do a pretty good job getting the mid-tour leaves in there too.
Okay, that's really good to hear. Additionally, so moving forward with that, yeah, what time because the world, like you said, had changed while you guys were there. Was there a point during it where, because you're pretty much secluded on the base, correct? I mean, did you guys had to do any quarantine sort of measures when COVID became a big thing?
Yeah. So, and it was, the deployment really, it was January 2020 to February 2021, which is like the exact window of COVID, developing across the world. So the first couple months, all it was really was like hearing all kinds of crazy stories from back home. It hadn't really escalated to the point of like everything just shutting down. But we were definitely feeling that by like April, May timeframe. They shut down all the DFACs in Iraq because all of the workers were getting sick. We had like local, national Iraqi workers. So they shut down all the DFACs and MREs for 5 months. And they, there was quarantine efforts in a sense of like, you're not really interacting with anybody outside your unit face to face. Like you go to shift and then you go back to your cot and sit there in your tent. Like you're not going around socializing, anything like that. That was really tough. Everybody got super close within our unit for sure. But that was a very long year. Yeah. As far as how it affected operations, I wouldn't say it was too big of an effect from a air missile defense standpoint because, we could still communicate with everybody not face to face. We wouldn't have been doing that anyway. We have radios and computers and things like that. So operationally, I don't think it had too much of an impact, but daily life on deployment, it's already not fun being stuck on a FOB or an air base in Iraq for a year, but that made it significantly less fun too.
Yeah, definitely. And then moving, so when your deployment was, okay, now that you have transitioned over to, where again did they move you or move you guys? Was it to Iraq from Kuwait then?
Yep. Yep. So I was
Okay.
in Erbil in like the north in Kurdistan, and then did some time toward the end of the deployment. They brought me down from as a tactician to help out the unit that was at Al Assad as well. So I kind of bounced back and forth in Iraq for that time.
What happened during that time? If you could go into that, were you seeing a lot of Iranian attacks during that time, as far as like them trying to strike at us, and then
Yeah. So I would say outside of the few instances of indirect fire on the bases themselves, which were few and far between. You know, Iranian activity to target U.S. personnel um, was not really a factor, and I think that brings up a really huge point for HIMAD specifically, Patriot, but air defense systems and how we use them in general. And you mentioned it in one of the questions, you had sent me, is that deterrence factor. Once we have our Patriot system set up, they know what the capabilities of it are and what its probability of kill percentages on their ballistic missiles. It's very good without going into specifics on here, but and they know that as well. Our system being there on an asset on a base is the deterring factor of why they're not shooting anymore. Um, it is truly a deterrence asset as well, and I've seen that deployments that I've gone with Patriot. The activity decreases significantly once satellite images show up that Patriot's in the house.
what was it like then? So getting done with that deployment and coming back to Fort Bliss.
Getting back was it for anyone of the listeners that has deployed, they know the logistics of that can be nightmarish at best. It's a lot of equipment and containers moving. All of it has to clear customs, and there is so much of the logistics aspect of it that make it quite a challenge and a huge team effort. And that's outside of your whatever branch you're in, your weapon system specialty or whatever you've been assigned by the Army to do. That's something that all officers are going to experience at some point, is the logistics of moving troops across the map, right? To include all the equipment and sensitive items and things like that. So that was a huge effort. We got everybody back though. And I, at that point, had about another year at Fort Bliss before I went to Captain's Career Course. And in that time, it was just resetting the unit, and they immediately just started gearing up for training again. And I was at that point one of the more senior guys that was pinning on captain at that point, and helping out the newer generation of lieutenants and tacticians to take over the weapon system and certify and do what I was doing downrange.
Are there any other roles you got to experience as a lieutenant? That being like an XO or anything like that?
Yeah. So after that first platoon I led, I got to do a second one. I got to do the fire control platoon within the same battery. So I was a platoon leader for 26 months. Like, that was awesome. And I even at that point didn't want to stop. I wanted to just keep doing it. And they're like, at a certain point, you got to go do something different, man. So at that point, and when we did deploy, I was the XO for the battery. That only lasted like 7 or 8 months because they needed more guys in the tactician position at battalion. So I went up there and worked in the fire direction center, the FDC. If you have any artillery guys that are listening, they'll know what an FDC is. That's your battalion level command and control element for fires, basically. It's where, and in Patriot, that's where we send our more senior, higher performing tactics guys that do well at the battery level. You get to go work in the FDC.
Okay. And then how has, talking more about big picture things, are you, because from 2016 to today, we've seen a lot of different, emerging problems or dilemmas that we see on the battlefield, such as drones. Like, how have you seen, how has ADA, or at your level, what have you seen the ADA deal with as far as taking down those threats, such as drones?
Yeah. So as far as the UAS or the drone threat, or proliferation of those. I think the biggest thing we've seen, especially in the Ukraine conflict and the Houthi rebels that are using them in CENTCOM, the biggest lesson that I think the world's getting out of that is that pretty much anybody can get their hands on these, regardless of national power, your money situation. Anybody at this point can get what we call a COTS, a commercial off-the-shelf drone system, and modify it to go have, kinetic effects on an enemy, right? Or just to surveil. And that's a huge problem, that the fact that even the smallest, poorest group can get this and hurt a US soldier with it, it is frightening. I think we're doing a really good job getting ahead of the game on that, though. And the biggest, I think, positive move we're making is that and they are training across the force outside of ADA some of our newer systems on how to take down these things, even simple ones like using nets to get small drones, fortifying vehicles where choke points of where those drones might go are more heavily fortified. I've even seen Marine Corps units using shotguns and training at the skeet shooting range, right? Effort to counter this right now, because there are not enough pure air defenders to just do the counter UAS mission, because we're all, obviously occupied on the heavier stuff, taking out ballistic missiles and advanced aircraft, cruise missiles, things like that. Yeah.
Definitely. And then, so going on more about that, it sort of brings into SHORAD. So how have you seen SHORAD grow in the time you've been in the ADA?
Yeah. So another great question and great point, because while air defense was growing when I joined, SHORAD was going away. It had been determined that the future fight is at the high altitudes with missiles and advanced aircraft, and that's where we need to put the money. Hindsight being 2020, looking back to that assessment being made in 2016, was blatantly incorrect, right? Because the heaviest amount of air defense action you're seeing in this Ukrainian conflict, or with the rebels in CENTCOM, or actions in Djibouti and in AFRICOM, right? It's all small UAS right now. And the SHORAD, we've readjusted to meet that threat, right? So it was shrinking. And then since I've been in, they've stood up 4 or 5 new battalions across the force with plans to do like 15 more. It's crazy how quick they're growing. Go ahead. You're about to say something.
That's kind of insane. And then what would their sort of weapon? So when you say they're making all these battalions, at least I just come from the 82nd. I had heard that we had deployed whatever unit we had for the ADA unit we had there had went to what do you call it? They went to the Middle East. I don't know exactly where they went during the when October 7th happened. They got called up. They got sent. I don't know exactly where they went, but where am I going at? Are we seeing a lot more of these like light infantry battalions or light infantry brigades? Are they getting more of these SHORAD units, like you were saying, maybe the Sergeant Stout or the CRAM?
Yeah, so that's where that growth is happening. It's starting to, specifically with SHORAD, it's integrating them into maneuver units. We're not standing up a new SHORAD brigade that just owns all the SHORAD. We're standing up battalions and divvying them out amongst maneuver elements, just as you mentioned, right? So having, some of our newer systems like the IFPIC, that's not fielded quite yet. It's still kind of in development, but those are all going to go to the multi-domain task force, the MDTFs. They're not going to be owned purely by an air defense commander. You'll have SHORAD units like go ahead.
What was that thing you just mentioned, sir? MIFTIC? And what is? Okay.
The latest and greatest, I would say it's probably still 2 or 3 years away from like full operational capability and fielding, maybe further. But that is going to be a gap bridger between SHORAD and HIMAD, basically. It'll have capabilities to do some of the lower end stuff that Patriot could have done, and also do a SHORAD mission. You'll have it linked in with CRAM guns along with missiles on the ground. It's just kind of a mixture of some of our more advanced systems. So those, as I mentioned, are getting divvied out to the MDTFs. Our SHORAD units here, even there's plans for 5-4 and 157, the two battalions that are here, to kind of divorce from our higher headquarters ADA brigade and just go to maneuver units like 2CR or any of the Fifth Corps rotational units that are out here. And that's for Europe specifically, but that's happening all over the force with SHORAD. So there's the understanding that from here on out, SHORAD is going to grow, and it's going to grow within maneuver elements, if that makes sense.
Yes, that makes sense. So in the ADA currently, what does it look like, working together as a team, either in a company or a battalion, or with your battalion other assets? Like, how does a battalion use you or a brigade use you when it's time to be used? Like, I think we talked about it. Is it just the base defense, or is it just, or for like a SHORAD, is it like they're traveling with a FLOT, your frontline trace, every time a unit moves?
Yeah, so with the with SHORAD specifically, it's I would say gone are the days of like that static base defense. Many would argue SHORAD should have never even been considered to use for that. It's not how it works, and it's not how it is used most efficiently. So it happened multiple times with my unit too. We with the Avenger unit, I get orders from higher echelon that we're going to get divvied out, and I'm going to send a platoon with 2CR out on exercise, and they are going to roll with the infantry or the cav and do mobile defense or mobile air defense as they maneuver to their objectives, right? Or for my unit specifically, our big exercise or deployment, I guess, that we did was over the course of the last like 9-10 months.
Okay, we were talking about how air defense is being utilized now with SHORAD. You had brought up that now they're being more maneuverable and things like that.
Yeah.
I think going from there, since it's such okay, you brought up, because you're in Europe right now, what sort of exercises are you doing, and then how are you learning, how has the learning experience been working with partner forces?
Yeah, so as far as opportunities to work with partner nations and partner militaries, which I've always found those have been some of the coolest experiences of my career. As far as opportunities for that, I don't think there's a better place than going to UCOM. So there's plenty of reasons why I love UCOM. I love being over here in Europe. But as far as the work environment, you will get to do a lot of that. It's all we do over here, especially being under NATO, right? So the exercises, on a typical one, we'll focus more of them on the summer months. Just from a weather standpoint, winter can get pretty rough over here, especially like if you're going east on the former Eastern Bloc, Poland, Romania, where a lot of these take place. We call it summer fighting season. Actually, it's kind of been named that. So you'll have your unit kind of divvied out by platoon, by squad, to support myriad of exercises that are taking place over that summer fighting season. And that's, going out and rolling with the Romanian infantry on a live fire, or, taking your system and your radar out to link in with the British because they're testing their new radar and they want to see if it can talk to ours, right? So small opportunities like that, like quick ones, a week or 3 weeks at a time, are plentiful, and there'll be plenty of those throughout a tour in Europe. And then there'll be the big ones, and that was one that my unit specifically got to jump in on, the Southern Shield exercise in Romania. That was specifically at an unclassified level, meant to be kind of a show of force for our adversaries over here. Obviously, who that is if we're talking Europe, right? But we took a radar in our Sentinel radar and our Avenger weapon systems, loaded up, ready to go out to a very close proximity to the border of Ukraine. And that, the spectrum that your radar gives off, like that can be seen. And it was a demonstration of how quickly we can go out there and get that done if you are going to threaten sovereign airspace. And that was really cool to be a part of that. And I know the Romanians really appreciated it. We were on their national news, and I'm, seeing myself on Romanian TV was kind of wild. But yeah, so like stuff like that as far as the partner nation experience, Europe, it's going to be tough to beat that.
Yeah, totally. Because we have all these capabilities. So when we talk about electromagnetic spectrum and us having such a big one, when it's time for us to, show it, I could see that both being a curse and a blessing. How do you guys, I would say, hide that in the event of you have your adversary's drones or somebody else trying to target you, looking for you because you shoot down, the big A2 or that area denial, weapon system.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, if you get me nerding out about the EM spectrum, we could be here all day. I love doing that. So the it is yes, a blessing and a curse. I think is a good way to put that, right? When we need to show force or show presence, it's a very easy way to do that. With our SHORAD systems, the Sentinel radars, they're powerful. They're much more mobile radars that roll with, these SHORAD elements. But if you're talking like a Patriot radar, even bigger, more powerful, and that is seen, from a very far distance, right? So that presence showing is absolutely a thing. In terms of the negative aspects of that and how we have to fight in future conflicts where everybody at this point is going to have the ability to lock in on signature, perform counterfire operations, that's where it can get dangerous. And that's what we're seeing through, unfortunately, very negative experiences of our Ukrainian counterparts. How bad or how quickly that can go wrong, right? If it's not managed correctly, to include cell phone use, right? Absolutely. There's experiences and battlefield assessments of Russians doing targeting based on cell phone signature, in a clump, right? You see that and it's like, that's our next target. And then a Ukrainian unit disappears, right? And the same thing has happened in reverse towards the Russians as well. So training for that as well, training our guys down to the most junior soldier, understanding what the electromagnetic spectrum is and how they contribute to it and what their footprint is on it. Prohibiting use of cell phone during field exercises and only using tactical comms that are encrypted and give off less signature. And then lesson learned from, Ukraine air defense operations as well is only utilizing those radars when absolutely necessary and when it's pertinent, right? For an air defense system to function, especially like Patriot, a long range one, I have to have a radar. So at some point I am going to have to turn it on. That's a risk that needs to be bought, right? But it's doing it, tactically and strategically to the point where we're doing it in small bursts, right? Or only when the threat window increases. When we know something is coming in at us, I have to turn it on and make an engagement, right? And then immediately going off, powering down and scooting. So the shoot and scoot tactics that the Ukrainians have been able to demonstrate are outstanding. And you'll hear the air defenders over here saying it, the ones that have gotten to train with them and like train them on, weapon systems that we've given them. The best air defenders in the world right now are in Ukraine, and because those guys are doing the job day in and day out to defend their homeland. And it's pretty cool what they've been able to come up with.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, that does sound. So talking a little bit about career progression from there and learning. You then went to Triple C from your lieutenant time back in Oklahoma, sir.
Yep.
And what does that look like? So, are you getting into more space operations and strategic level stuff, or what does Captain's Career Course look for you guys?
Yeah, so Captain's Career Course was obviously a much different experience because by the time you're there, you and all your peer classmates have been out doing the job and have some experience to speak on, I found Triple C to be a hugely rewarding course. You'll hear a lot of people say like it's a take a knee course. I think it could be that for a lot of people. It is absolutely a you get in, you get out what you put into it. But if you go there engaged, ready to network with your peers and actually learn some of this higher level stuff, you get a lot out of it. And I absolutely did. The biggest misconception about it is that it's a course to learn how to be a commander. It is not. It is a course how to be a battalion or brigade staff officer. And that is likely what the first thing you're going to do when you get out of that course and go to your next unit while you hop into the command queue. To take a battery. Yes, we got a little more into the strategic level and space operations there. And that's actually the first opportunity you have as an air defender to go into that more like space world kind of, even the functional area of going to be a space officer. So that first VTIP opportunity is going to be like just before Triple C or during Triple C. And that's where we had a few guys even in my class go to A40 for space operations. I have not been in space operations. I know a lot of the guys that are in it, and I can obviously I could link you up with one of them maybe to go probably more in depth on that. But yeah, they for currently as it stands now, the space operations guys will still go to Air Defense Triple C as their main Triple C option. So we had the 14 alphas in our class, and then we had the FA40s as well. And then you have post Triple C, you have a few more opportunities to make the VTIP jump still. I think, if I'm not mistaken, the last one being around that major time frame. And then, during the Triple C coursework, we went in a little bit on, what they were going to be doing and what space-based capabilities we do have as well. So you get a 101 level rundown at Triple C as well.
You had mentioned that you are training basically to become a work on staff for FA. Is that what happened once you had gotten done with the FA Triple C, or correction, ADA Triple C? Where did you go from there?
It's something, but the follow-on from Triple C was to 5-7 ADA here in Germany. So that is the Patriot Battalion that's in Germany. So I stuck with Patriot. At this point, the marketplace had become a thing for officers and job opportunities. So you have a lot more control of like where you want to go. You're actually interviewing for places. And I had known since early on in my career, I really wanted to go do a Europe tour, and I got lucky and got selected. So that was to be as a FDC OIC. So similar to what I had done pre-Triple C at 243 in Fort Bliss. So I went to the Fire Direction Center there. And was kind of the battalion's like lead tactical planner for the Patriot system. It falls into the S3 as far as staff positions go for operations. And I was doing that knowing I was in the command queue too, which here in Europe, it's about a year and a half generally to get a battery. In that year, I was with 5-7. I went to Poland for about 10 months of it on a rotational mission there, supporting the newly established support to Ukraine for their conflict, because that just kicked off really as I was getting over there. So we rapidly deployed out to the Patriot system, out to an airfield or an airport in southeastern Poland. That airport functioned as kind of the funnel for all of the aid that we were giving to the Ukrainians, specifically like lethal aid. So all of the donated weapons from across NATO and across the world, or a large percentage of them, were funneling through that airport. And that obviously made it a pretty big defended asset and target if the adversary was to do anything. So that's where we positioned our system to defend. And yeah, that was about 10 months. So super cool experience there. Got to work with a lot of Ukrainian partners and stuff that were learning Patriot as well, because we were donating some of those systems over to them as this conflict was kicking off too. So really cool experience getting to work with them, as well as the Polish and the Germans that were out there too, and a bunch of other countries that were supporting that effort there as well.
Okay. And then at this time, since you're on staff, so what sort of missions or work do they have you doing? Is it basically just you're outlining where you could set up sites, or what sort of things are you working on in a brigade staff, sir?
Yeah, so in that FDC position, pre-mission, if we're not actively engaged in a deployment mission or defense of an asset, it is planning for future ones and, streamlining the training of all the crews in the battalion, just same as back at Fort Bliss, training up those young crews to man the system when they go out on mission. When we're actually deployed, that FDC position that I was in is also on a crew and pulling shift at the battalion level. So you kind of picture it just like a task org structure. From a tactical standpoint, there's the battalion level, crew, the Fire Direction Center, and we control the different batteries' weapon systems too. They all kind of feed into us. We get all of their radar air pictures fed into our main one. And there's different levels of decision making for engaging different threats or when something's going to be launched, when the radar's turned on, etc. So when I was out in Poland the entire time, I was manning a shift as well at the radar screen as the battalion representative.
And then from there, is that when you picked up your Q?
Yep. So I finished up there. I was only in that unit for a little over a year. And I got back from that Poland mission. I went back to a school at Fort Sill for about 6 weeks. It's called the Patriot Top Gun course, and that's an officer school for like on the O side and warrant officers for very in-depth planning and Patriot systems operation. It's a pretty selective, challenging course that they send 15 officers a year to get to like that graduate level of air missile defense operations. I did that, and then immediately after getting back, came over here to the other side of Germany, where we were standing up this new battalion, 157, and that was the SHORAD battalion that I just commanded in. So I stood up Alpha Battery and kind of activated it from scratch, and that was my 19-month command that I just finished up a few weeks ago.
What was it like getting new lieutenants into that sort of a brand new unit? Did they come from Poland already, or were they coming from Bullock? And then, what is it like to stand up a whole new unit? That's really amazing, sir.
Standing up a unit is the single hardest thing I've had to do in the Army, and I would imagine anyone that's had to do it would probably agree. Because you really don't realize how much goes into and how many different moving pieces there are in a unit that's stood up and functional already. You just don't see it. But when you have to build all those systems and processes from zero, you realize how much stuff goes into a functioning unit. And yeah, it was mostly with brand new people out of the schoolhouse. Most of the soldiers were fresh out of AIT. The NCOs, the junior ones, were second term soldiers maybe that had served at one other unit, and they sent them over here to activate the new SHORAD battalion. And then all of the officers were brand new out of Bullock, which made it, for like XO selection, you can't really pick based off experience. It's just whoever showed up first was the XO and was learning XO duties as a second lieutenant. And, the team effort that we were able to cultivate, across the battalion, I think made it work. It ended up being a very successful stand-up over the last, 2 years. But I mean, there were growing pains with that too. So like we didn't get any of our primary staff officers in until like a year into it. So our S1 for the first year was an air defense second lieutenant. Our S2 was an air defense second lieutenant, So there was growing pains with that as well. I think the lesson there being, wherever you go as an officer, they're going to use you how they need to use you. And that might not be something you expected. So I would say, mentally prepare for that as well. But we were able to make it work. Now it's a stood up functioning unit, and I just handed it off to the next guy, and now I'm off to division staff now. So I'm sticking around in Germany for another year and a half or two until ILE. So, and that's kind of.
Oh, yeah, okay. Interesting. And then, all right. And then once you get into sort of division work, I mean, they have these ideas of what a brigade fight is, what a division fight is. How have you heard that sort of evolve, or have you heard that before? And as far as areas of responsibility with such a what do you call it, massive enabler such as ADA.
Mm-hmm. So our division level structure is a little different than what you might see on the maneuver side. They don't really go by division. It's the Army Air and Missile Defense Command. It's a double AMDC, we call them. So there's 3 primary ones right now. You have 10th, which does all of the stateside ones. You have 94th double AMDC out of Hawaii, which handles all of Indo-PACOM. And then you have 10th here in Sembach, Germany. So 10th double AMDC owns air defense for U.S. Army, Europe, and Africa, which is all the European subcontinent and then all of Africa as well. And so what we're doing more at that level is obviously that strategic level piece of it. So anytime you move a Patriot system anywhere, that is a strategic level move from a deterrent standpoint. And it's just scope of reach, right? And then direction of where those SHORAD units are going to get integrated into what maneuver elements, etc. So thinking much more broad stroke on working with allies and partners, establishing relationships with them purely from an air defense standpoint, establishing the permissions to integrate our newest, greatest radar with the British new radar, right? Or setting up a time where we can go out with the Norwegians and do a Patriot live fire, right? So it's a lot of planning and exercises at that level, multinationally, if that helps. I think that would much more fall into the double AMDC rather than the brigade staff.
That's really cool to hear, sir. One thing I would like to backtrack on is, so, coming from a SHORAD unit that's new, is there anything you specifically learned, like some lessons learned during that experience that you could pass on to, officers who are, just discovering SHORAD or getting into those new units?
Yeah, so it was especially interesting for me, I think, being a high mad pure guy. And there is a bit of a friendly rivalry divide amongst air defense, right? They'll tell you the high mad guys are the nerdy rocket scientist guys, while the SHORAD guys are the ones going out with the infantry and maneuver and doing a little more hardcore stuff. It was a bit of a wake-up call for me, because I didn't know, when I took command, I didn't know very much about the Avenger weapon system. That's okay as long as you have the grit and the drive to dig in and learn it. As a commander, I don't think the top priority is being a master of the assigned weapon system. It's, at that level, it's a much more administrative position, and you are just doing that unit training management piece, right? So I knew going into it, I had, sergeant's first class, like my 2 platoon sergeants that I got assigned as we stood up. They had the expertise in the weapon system. They'd been working with Avenger for a hot minute at that point. They were both master gunners. So I knew, I need to learn the basics of it. I need to learn how the gunnery cycle works, what the basic capes and limbs of the system are. But as far as the, planning how to do the gunnery and planning, what best practices work for going out and doing live fire ranges and getting our guys certified to pull a mission, that's their area of expertise. As a commander, and even, down to the platoon leader level, just as an officer, you need to be focused on creating an end state of what you want to get to. And mine was, in our first year, by the end of the fiscal year, I want both platoons 100% Table 8 gunnery certified, and with everybody, qualified on individual weapons if we get called to deploy at the 1 year mark of activation. However you guys do that, or however you see fit, make it happen. Let me know what you need. And they went out and did that. And then at the year mark, we got the call and deployed. So it played out like that. Thank God we prepared to that level, right? The biggest thing for any of the young officers going into it, just SHORAD or HIMAD, or really any branch you go into, is you are the generalist. You are not the specialist or the expertise on any specific weapon system that you're going into. I'd say maybe the exception is like a pilot or an aviator, right? That you might have a little bit of a difference there, but your job as the commander or the platoon leader is, you get a commander's intent from hire, you mold that into your battery company level end state, build the end state first, and then build the key tasks based off that. That's your left and right limits that you're giving to your guys, and let them amaze you with what they can go do with that, because they will. And that is the most rewarding thing, coming out of command. What I learned, you can give them the end state in the left and right, and as long as you're monitoring it throughout and making sure that it's being done safely and efficiently, they're going to blow you away with what they accomplish.
Yeah, no kidding, sir. Yeah, mission command definitely, like, that's all the things we try to teach our lieutenants here, is that when someone gives you a task, you go out, you try to achieve it, but you also need to let the experts be experts, whether that be your NCOs or whatnot, and leverage their knowledge, because you don't know everything. So that is awesome to hear, sir. Do you have anything else to add for new lieutenants before we close it out?
No, I know I've rambled quite a bit. Obviously, air defense is a subject I'm very passionate about. I've made my career out of it, and look to continue doing that. So with that said, it is a very small branch. If any of your guys do branch ADA, they will see me at some point, whether I'm a leader over them or a mentor or just run into them out in the force. So with that said, you got my number. Feel free to give it out to anyone that's interested. And would love to field more questions or get into more specifics if any of them are interested. But Other than that, thank you guys for having me on. I appreciate it.